Welcome back, everyone. We're now going to start taking evidence from a new witness, Mr. Stephen Howard of the BRE. So my first task is to make sure that Mr. Howard is there and can see me and hear me. Mr. Howard.
Yes, I can see you and hear you.
Good, thank you very much indeed. Well, now there are one or two things we need to do. The first is that I have to ask you to make the affirmation. Do you have on your screen in front of you the affirmation? You do. Could I ask you please then to say the words on the screen?
I do solemnly, sincerely, and truly declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much indeed. Can I next ask you to confirm that you're alone in the room from which you're giving your evidence?
I'm alone in the room.
Thank you. And that you have no documents or other materials with you?
I have no documents or other material.
Thank you very much. And can you also confirm that your mobile phone is in another room and that you don't have any other electronic device with you which is capable of receiving messages?
That is correct. I have no mobile phone or other devices.
Lovely. Thank you very much indeed. Now, you may like to know this, you've probably been told that your legal representatives are in the virtual hearing room following the progress. They are able to intervene if they think it essential, but we have an arrangement which should enable them to contact counsel to the inquiry if they think there's a need to raise anything. And so, except in an emergency, I'm going to ask them to keep their microphones and cameras switched off, but as I say, they are following your evidence. I hope we shan't have problems with our sound or vision, but if we do, we'll take a short break and solve them in that way. We shall have a short break during this afternoon, about 3:15, but if you feel you need an additional break at any time, will you just indicate and we'll do our best to accommodate you. Since I'm mentioning breaks, I'm going to say something now which I'll remind you of from time to time, and that is, once you've started giving your evidence, it's very important that you don't discuss your evidence or anything relating to it with anyone else until you've completely finished. I'll try and remind you of that whenever we have a break, but if I forget to do so, please bear it in mind. All right?
Yes.
Now, is there anything you'd like to raise with me or ask me?
No, I haven't any questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, if you're ready to go, then I'll invite Mr. Millett to put some questions to you. Yes, Mr. Millett, when you're ready.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Mr. Howard, good afternoon, and thank you very much for coming to the inquiry to give your evidence. We're extremely grateful to you. I hope that you can hear me clearly and see me clearly.
Yes, I can.
Thank you. If you have any difficulty understanding the questions I'm going to ask you, say so, and I can ask the question again, or I can put it in a different way. And if you feel you need a break, other than at the scheduled break times that you've been told about, please let us know. We can do that. I would ask you to keep your voice up if you could, please, so that our transcriber, whom you can't see, can nonetheless get down clearly what you're saying onto the transcript. And also, when answering my questions, please, if you wouldn't shake your head or nod your head, because those don't go onto the transcript. You have to say no or yes, as the case may be. Yes?
I understand.
Now, you've provided a witness statement to the inquiry. Could I please take you to that? It'll come up on the screen in front of you. Is that the first page of your statement?
Yes, it is.
For the record, it's BRE 405771, and that's page 1. Can we go, please, to page 74 in that document? You'll see a signature and a date, 15th of July 2019, and a signature. Is that your signature?
Yes.
Have you read this witness statement recently?
Yes,
And do you say that its contents are true?
I do.
Have you discussed your statement or your evidence with anybody before coming here today to give your evidence?
No, I haven't.
I'm going to start some questions with the subject of your background, education, training, and employment history. In your witness statement, you don't mention having any qualifications relevant to fire safety. Can I take it, therefore, that you don't have any qualifications relevant to fire safety?
I don't have any qualifications relevant to fire safety.
Do you have any formal qualifications at all?
No.
Right. Now, if we go to paragraph 2 of your statement, you can see that you say on page 1, paragraph 2, we can just have that up, that you joined the BRE on the 12th of July 1999. Yes?
Yes, that's correct.
Say there that your originally my main responsibility was the development of fire testing facilities for fire detection and alarm systems to underwriters' laboratory standards for the insurance industry. And you say also in paragraphs 3 to 4, and I'll summarize, that between 1999 and 2006, you were involved in the fire testing of cables and also the research and investigations into the Rose Park fires. Yes?
That's correct.
And various prison cell and underground park fires, firefighter physiology, and police investigations into the fatal fires in Anglesey and at St Neots. Yes?
Yes.
Summarise that for you. Did you undergo any training to enable you to fulfil those roles that you've described in those paragraphs of your statement?
For the first role, well, before I joined BRE, I was working for the Loss Prevention Council, where I did quite a lot of work on fire detection and fire alarm systems.
Right.
From a certification point of view. So I was there for a number of years. Before that, I had a number of practical roles and jobs that contributed to my experience in those areas.
Can we go back to paragraph 4 of your statement, please? Where you identify your involvement in the research and investigations into the fires you identified there. Did you have, were any of those cladding fires or fires in domestic premises?
The Rose Park fire was a care home. Various prison cells speak for themselves. The fatal fire at Anglesey was a flat, I believe, above a shop, and the fire at St Neots was, I seem to recall, a care home.
Right, but not a cladding fire. None of them are cladding fires.
No, none of those were cladding fires.
And none of those were investigations into fires in high-rise residential buildings.
No.
Now, towards the end of the 1999-2006 period, you say that you were involved in carrying out large-scale fire testing of sandwich panels for the LPCB approval purposes, which is LPS 781, I think.
Yes, the screen's not changed. I'm still on the same page.
Yes, that's because I haven't asked you to go to paragraph 5 on page 2. And let's go there. So you say that. The LPCB is the Loss Prevention Certification Board, is it?
That's correct.
Did you have any specific training for the work you identify there?
Yes, I was trained by others within BRE to undertake those tests.
I see. Who trained you?
Two people mostly. It was Richard Colwell and David Hall.
Right. And did that training involve the use of the rigs at the burn hall in order to carry out large-scale fire tests?
No, that's a different test. Those tests were actually run in a facility in Middlesbrough or off-site.
I see. Can you tell us a little bit more then about what was involved in these large-scale tests?
The 1181 test is essentially the fire testing of sandwich panels. So you would instrument the system, put in various thermocouples, set up fire source, set up data loggers, basically ignite the ignition source, run the test for the prescribed period of time, record the data, make notes of the build, or damage to the build and produce a test report accordingly.
Right. Did any of those tests involve tests on ACM panels with a PE core?
No,
Did any of those tests involve testing combustible insulation?
yes,
Good. And were those combustible insulation panels separately from the sandwich panels or forming part of the sandwich panels?
there was two different, well, you can have sandwich panels which are twin skin with a PIR core or polyisocyurinate core. There was other systems where there was combustible insulation in there behind, which basically a built up wall.
Right, so quite similar to a BS8414 test.
Well, it was no, not directly similar. They are similar in terms of fire testing, but they're not directly comparable because one is basically a self-contained room, whereas a cladding test is a vertical shredder flame.
Now, in 2006, you tell us, same page, paragraph 6, just below where we'd be looking, that you were made joint business group manager for passive fire with Dr. Sarah Colwell. So does that mean that you sat alongside her in parallel to her in that role?
Yes.
And you explain what the role was, managerial, covering fire resistance testing, reaction to fire testing, testing to BS8414 parts 1 and 2, LPCB activities, LPS 1181 testing and assessments. When you started in that role, as you've described it there, how far advanced was the project to have BS8414 and the BR135 criteria introduced into approved document B as the alternative or an alternative route to compliance?
I don't know the answer to that. It's not something I was directly involved with at the time.
Right. You may not have been directly involved at the time, I understand that. Can you give us then any insight into who that project was being led by at the BRE at that time, 2006?
Which project would that be? The one to introduce BR135 into approved document B?
Yes.
I don't know.
You don't know. You had, am I right in thinking you had nothing to do with that?
I wasn't directly involved in the cladding testing or the amendments to BR1 approved document B, no.
From your knowledge at the time, did Kingspan play any part in contributing towards the project to have the BS8414 test method and BR135 criteria enshrined in approved document B?
I don't know the answer to that.
Can you provide at least an overview, summary of your involvement in BS8414 tests from the period to 2006 to 2014?
My involvement, I would have witnessed a large number of tests. I was down there for a large number of tests. We did a lot of report reviews, standard reviews, and things of that nature, familiarisation with the test.
And in relation to those matters, who reported to you during that period?
So I'm not sure what we're directly with in relation to cladding.
Well, in relation to BS8414 tests.
I'm not sure of that actually. It may have been Phil Clark at the time, but he may have been working somewhere else on those tests. I didn't really get involved in cladding until a lot later. In that period, my focus was elsewhere.
Right. When did you become involved in cladding, as you refer to it?
It was, I think that's actually given in the statement, the date when Tony Baker was promoted and I took on more of a role.
Yes, and indeed, at paragraph 7 of the statement, you say that your involvement in cladding increased when Tony Baker was promoted to the manager for fire resistance in or around 2014. What I'm really asking you about is who reported to you during the period before that in relation to testing to BS 8414 parts 1 and 2?
It would have probably been Phil Clark for those areas, and to some extent Tony, but Tony Baker also reported to me.
Right, Tony Baker and Phil Clark. Did you take steps to make sure that Tony Baker and Phil Clark carried out their work correctly and appropriately?
Yes.
How did you supervise them?
Well, with regard to Tony Baker, he was a senior member of staff. We had lots of discussions. There was lots of activity around the fire testing. He was also the author, been heavily involved in BR 135. In terms of Phil Clark, again, there was a lot of activity in the burn hall and reviews of files and reports and data that was produced.
Let's see if we can break it down a bit more. You tell us in paragraph 6 that you had a managerial role covering, among other things, testing to BS 8414, and in paragraph 7 that the involvement in cladding increased in or around 2014. So with that in mind, could you tell us what your methods were for supervising the work of those who reported to you in that sphere of activity, namely Tony Baker and Phil Clark, as you've identified them?
Right. At that time, Dr. Sarah Colwell was the main lead on cladding.
On cladding. Are you drawing a distinction between 8414 parts 1 and 2 testing and cladding?
No. Yes.
So
Colwell was the lead on BS 8414.
So at that time, 2006 to 2014, Sarah Colwell was the main lead on cladding.
Yep.
For which we can also read BS 8414 testing. What was your role?
I was more involved in reaction to fire testing and the other aspects. As it says there, we were looking at developing installer schemes for passive fire protection. 1181 testing.
Did you supervise Phil Clark and Tony Baker specifically in relation to their work on testing anything to BS 8414 parts 1 and 2?
Not directly, no. I don't believe I did, but it was a joint role.
Indirectly?
Sorry?
Indirectly.
Yes, I would guess I was there and part of the management team for the department, but I can't remember specifically whether there was supervision of BS, whether I was directly involved in BS 8414, directly supervising either Tony or Phil Clark.
Who directly supervised Phil Clark and Tony Baker's work during the period 2006 to 2014 on BS 8414 tests?
I think, well, I can't really recall at that, but I would expect it was Sarah Colwell.
Right. In percentage terms, roughly, how much of the role would you say occupied your time in relation to the testing to BS 8414?
That's very difficult to answer. Possibly 10%, if that, maybe less.
That gives us an impression, then, at least, of the degree of your involvement during that period. Did you receive any specific training in relation to BS 8414 testing?
Yes, we were down there. I was down in the burn hall quite a lot, witnessing tests, talking, discussing things with Tony Baker and Sarah Colwell, and things of that nature.
Did you read during that period the 2003 second edition of BR 135 or the third edition published in 2013?
Yes, I would have read it. I would specifically have read the 2013. I can't recall whether I read the previous version.
Did you read the BS 8414 Part 1 and BS 8414 Part 2 standards published by the BSI?
Yes.
So can we take it that you were familiar with both the standard and the criteria?
Yes.
Now, in paragraph 7, which we have on the screen, you say that in 2014 your involvement in cladding increased. We've established that means BS 8414. Does that mean that you became more heavily involved with the actual tests themselves?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
What was it about the promotion of Tony Baker that led to your increase in your involvement in cladding testing?
Because Tony Baker was largely responsible for the delivery of the tests up to that period. So with his promotion to fire resistance testing, there was a requirement for someone to oversee the activities and step into the role that he was vacating.
Yes, I see. By 2014, roughly, and it is roughly, how many BS 8414 tests and BR 135 classifications had you been involved in?
I don't know, but that is information that we can obtain if necessary.
It's not necessary to have the precise number, but roughly, was it in the tens or in the hundreds?
Tens, definitely.
Right. And now, in 2016, you were promoted to Director of Fire Testing and Certification at the BRE, weren't you?
Yes.
Are you still in that role at the BRE today?
No.
What is your role at the BRE today?
I no longer work for BRE.
Right. Where do you work now?
I work for a consultancy company called International Fire Consultants.
Right. And what's that called? International Fire Consultants.
Yes.
That's it. IFC.
Yes.
IFC. Right. I see. Okay. And how long have you worked there for?
It will be a year in May.
And what's your role there?
I'm a principal consultant.
Principal consultant. Now, given your background, would you say that at all times, throughout the period from 2006, you've had a good understanding of the regulations governing fire safety?
Yes, I have a good understanding of the test methods and the application of the tests.
Did you have a good understanding of the building regulations relating to fire, and in particular, approved document B?
In relation to certain tests that I run, I wouldn't say at that time I was an expert in approved document B because it covers a large number of areas and a large number of disciplines. So
you understood well enough the role that BS 8414 tests to a BR 135 criteria play within approved document B, yes?
Yes.
Did you receive any training from the BRE or any other institution within the community, the testing community or the cladding industry generally, about approved document B and specifically BS 8414 within it?
I received in-house training on the subject.
From who?
From Sarah Colwell, Richard Colwell, Tony Baker.
And what form did that training take?
It would have just been on the job training, basically going through
Right.
the relationship and an understanding between how the test and classification relates.
I'm sorry, I was trying to interrupt you, not deliberately, but I may have done. Say on the job training, did you ever get sat in a conference room and given a slideshow about BR 135 or BS 8414?
I can't recall specifically, but yes, there were presentations that were developed and given at various times. So it's quite possible that I've gone through in-house training, but I don't remember specifically.
To whom else was this in-house training afforded during this period?
Sorry, you cut out for a second.
Was this in-house training given to anybody else during this period?
I can't recall. I think at the time, Phil Clark was taking a lead on cladding, or was responsible for delivery, and Tony Baker, Sarah Colwell was still involved at standards and BR 135 level. I can't recall any other specific training to start.
Do you remember whether Phil Clark himself actually had the benefit of the training presentations that you've described?
I wouldn't recall, because he was actually involved in the cladding as I joined Passive.
Would you agree, as a matter of principle, that the purpose of BS 8414 is to test a cladding system as it's intended to be used on a building, thereby provide a full understanding of how that system, as tested, would perform in an actual fire?
Yes, that's my understanding.
And was it always your understanding?
Yes, I believe so.
Did you always understand that in order to be compliant with approved document B, only a system which complied exactly and corresponded exactly with the system as tested would qualify?
Yes, the approved document B basically specifies system should be classified to BR 135.
Was there ever a time that you can remember when you thought that if a system passed the BR 135 criteria, having been tested under BS 8414, then a system different from the one tested could be used?
That, I think that is quite I will try to answer that. Approved document B is advisory, it's guidance. So my understanding is that it is not the only route to cladding being installed, or the agreement to include a cladding system to be installed on a building. So therefore, you do not need BR 135 for cladding to be installed on the building. You would do to meet the requirements of approved document B.
Yes, I'm not sure I put the question terribly elegantly, or whether you've understood it. Was there ever a time when you thought that a system tested under BS 8414, which met BR 135 criteria, could be applied in any different form, even if slightly different form, on a real building from the system as tested?
Well, as I said, BS 8414 is a test standard. BR 135 is a classification, but that is only the one route to compliance or agreement with ADB. So there is a process whereby you might not have the system as specified or as classified.
Yes, I understand that. But if you were following the alternative route to compliance, as it came to be known, was there ever a time when you thought that the rules didn't require that you replicated the system on a building as had been tested?
If you're claiming compliance, or if you are presenting BR 135 as your route to compliance with ADB, then yes, the system should match what's on the building.
And was it always your view that it should match?
Yes.
Was there a time when you thought it might not have to?
Well, as I said, it's not the only route to compliance. So once you have that BR 135, then it is for others to determine compliance with the building regs.
If you were going to use that as your route to compliance, Was there ever a time when you thought that the as-built didn't have to match the as-tested?
No, if you're using it as your route to compliance, then it should match the BR135.
Now, was there ever a time when you thought that the UK construction industry was not aware of that requirement, that the as-built must match the as-tested if you're going to use that as the route to compliance?
Was I ever aware?
Yes. Was there ever a time when you thought that the UK construction industry was not aware of the requirement that the system as built must match the system as tested?
Well, for those systems that are BR135 classified, my understanding was that that is the route to compliance, and the construction industry in the UK understood that.
Indeed. So you thought they did understand that?
Yes.
Did BRE ever take any steps to ensure that its clients were aware of this, or thought it was necessary to spell it out to clients?
Well, there was promotional activity around BS8414 and BR135. There's myself and Sarah Colwell and possibly Tony Baker presenting on the subject matter of testing and meeting the recommendations with an approved document B.
Do you agree that, given the classification reports, or indeed test reports for that matter, refer only to the particular system containing the components installed at the time of the test, do you agree that it's vitally important that sufficient and accurate detail is provided within such a report so that the components are readily identifiable?
Yes, if you're if you're on the BR135 route to compliance or meeting the recommendations of ADB, then the test reports and classification reports should be accurate.
Yes. Do you also accept that it's vitally important that the component parts detailed in the report are completely identified? There's nothing missing?
Yes.
Now, paragraph 12 of your statement, if we can go to that, please, top of page 3. You say 3 lines down within paragraph 12, you say, BRE then carries out the large-scale fire test to record time and temperature details as expressly set out in BS 8414 parts 1 and 2. If requested by the test sponsor, BRE will produce a test report confirming the nature of the test and recording the relevant time and temperature data. Such a test report will not of itself constitute any sort of classification. Can we take it that you were aware that ADB contained no mention of meeting the criteria in BR135 pursuant to a BS 8414 test as an alternative route to compliance until 2007?
Yeah. No, well, no, I don't know the answer to that, because what I would have to do is review the previous version of approved document B. I'm familiar with the 2006 version, but I wouldn't specifically know what was in the previous version of approved document B in regard to BS 8414 and 135.
This may be a timing point. You say in your statement you started being involved with BS 8414 in 2006.
Yeah.
In fact, that's the time when, that's the actual official date of the involvement. It didn't come in until April 2007.
Yeah.
I take it that there wasn't a time when you were involved with BS 8414 testing when BS 8414 and BR135 were not within ADB. That's
correct. In my experience, it was always within that document.
Right. Looking at the period before 2006, and I appreciate it's before you were involved in BS 8414 testing, but from your involvement at the BRE at that time, can you help us understand why clients would want to have a BS 8414 test before it had become enshrined as the test which would sanction alternative route compliance?
I wouldn't know the answer to that. I was not involved at that time till 2006. So by the time I got involved, there was a recommendation with an approved document B for the test and the classification method.
Okay, thank you. I'd like then to turn to BRE's standard operating procedures. Now, during your time as Joint Business Group Manager for passive fire testing, which, as you said, was between 2006 and 2014, Mr. Howard, and as Director of Fire Testing and Certification at the BRE from 2014 onwards, 2 periods, were you always familiar with the BRE's standard procedures? At least so far as your role
Yes.
is concerned, yeah? Yes. Were you responsible for ensuring that the standard procedures were followed in respect of BS 8414 tests which were carried out?
Yes.
And
With others at the start, and as the career progressed, yes, responsible.
now, you told us a little bit earlier about your supervising Tony Baker and Phil Clark. Can you tell us what your system of supervision of those 2 BRE employees was? Let's start with Phil Clark. What was your system of supervising his work?
That was largely review of test reports and review of files at that time until 2014. Really, my involvement in cladding was on the periphery, and it was more training and familiarisation. I wasn't directly involved at the outset of the projects in that time.
And after 2000, well, actually, when in 2014 did you assume a greater role in relation to cladding and BS 8414 testing?
I wouldn't know without reference to the statement, and if the date's in there, I couldn't guess the month.
You've given us those dates. You can't recall? Is that?
No.
Right. From 2014, whenever it was in that year, what were the steps you would take to supervise Phil Clark's work?
There was more emphasis on more methodical approach, record keeping, reviews, witnessing tests, understanding issues with the testing system.
You say there was emphasis on more methodical approach. Do you mean there that you adopted a method, you began to adopt a methodological approach or methodical approach, record keeping, reviews, witnessing tests, and understanding issues with the testing system yourself?
Yes.
Right. You're not saying that when you came in to supervise him, you asked him to adopt a more methodical approach? Or did you?
No, it's an ongoing process with labs. It's with fire testing and laboratories that we're constantly looking to improve.
Did you have periodic reviews of Mr. Clark's work?
I didn't conduct any PDRs with Phil Clark until he actually joined Passive, which was in, I think, 2016, because the work Phil actually reported to directly to Stephen Manchester, who was a colleague that delivered work for Passive for those areas, for cladding.
Before 2016, who conducted PDRs, as you call them? Is it periodic development reviews with Mr. Clark?
It would have been Steve Manchester, I believe.
From your knowledge, how regular were those?
Yearly.
Yearly. What did they take?
Sorry?
Form did those periodic performance reviews take?
There'd be a sit-down meeting, I would guess, recalling what they were like. It was basically a review of performance and then goals for the following year.
Did anybody else review Mr. Clark's work or his operating procedures from 2014 onwards?
Well, it would have been Steve Manchester for the area up until he moved across to Passive, which I believe was 2016.
I see. Now, can we go to paragraph 52 of your statement, please, on page 12? You say there, and this is in answer to the question Q2, have you at any stage of your involvement with BSA 414 testing or classification of BR 135 been aware of any deviation from standard or best practice as you understand it? If so, please give full details, including identification of the relevant dates, test sponsor, and tested system, with details of all individuals involved. You say, I cannot recall, this is in paragraph 49, and then any deviation from standard or best practice. There's a continual process of improvement as required by the standards against which BRE is accredited. I'm just pausing there. Those are UCAS standards which apply to BRE. UCAS
are the accreditation body. The actual standards are international standards.
Is that, well, can you tell me what that is?
17025 for the testing. ISO 17025.
ISO 17025. Can we go into paragraph 52? And there's a question there under R. If you have ever had any concerns as to any aspect of the BRE's BSA 414 testing, please describe the nature of and reasons for any such concerns. In respect of any such concerns, what action did you take? In paragraph 52, you say, in or around March 2011, I raised an issue with those involved in the testing, but the test reports and files were being returned to those involved in the testing repeatedly with the same issues. I had an internal email exchange with Tony Baker, Tom Lennon, and Phil Clark to discuss and resolve this. When you say the same issues, what were those issues?
It's possible, I can't recall in detail, but it's possibly things like missing paperwork, or the paperwork's not being filed correctly, or right. Certain items of paperwork not being signed. Project numbers are not attached to.
Right. If you go to paragraph 53, you say, following this exchange, we worked to improve BRE's approach to reporting. By way of example, see the email from Phil Clark dated 15th May 2013, attaching updated copies of BRE's standard operating practice. Now, when you say we worked to improve BRE's approach to reporting, who are you referring to here?
Well, in the first paragraph, it was discussions with Tony Baker, Tom Lennon, and Phil Clark.
That's, I see. So you were all involved in an effort to improve BRE's approach to reporting. Is that right?
Yes.
And what changes were made? What changes were made as a result of that?
It's hard to recall. It's a very long time ago. I think there was paperwork generated by Phil Clark. Beyond that, without going back through the records at the time, it's very difficult to recall. It might have been things like more structure to the files, making sure that we had the paperwork, correct paperwork.
I'm going to do that in a moment, but just tell me generally, what was your role in updating BRE's standard operating practice? I can't recall. Possibly signed off or approved standard operating procedures, but I can't recall what I approved at that time or what I generated. Let's go to the email that you're referring to there. It's a BRE 405773 at page 2. And we can see on page 2 that Phil Clark sends Tony Baker and Tom Lennon, copied to Steve Manchester and you, cladding test drawings data sheets. And he says, Tony, Tom, I've looked at the cladding procedure and have updated some of the SOP and drawings. Please, could you have a look at the attached documents and let me know if you have any comments and or addition. When we're all back in, I will convene a meeting to discuss moving the cladding forward. Cheers, Phil. Now you've got this email. Did you read it, do you think?
I believe I read that, yes.
And there are a number of documents attached. If you look at the top, you can see what they are, because you, I think, forwarded this email to yourself. You see that on the 26th of June, 2019. Just after, well, I imagine, in preparation for your statement, and you can see that one of the attachments is standard procedures. Can you see that?
Yes.
Staying in the same document run, if we could scroll down please to page 5, we see the first page of the standard operating procedures document for undertaking BS 8414, parts 1 and 2 tests. Is it right, if we look at this, we can scroll together. The first part of that document, pages 5 to 10, relates to the pre-test setup, doesn't it? We could scroll the pages down 5 to 6 to 7 to 8 to 9 to 10. See that?
Yes, I'm on page 7.
Yes, and then 8, and then 9, and then 10. Same again. And if you go to page 6 within that run, let's just go back to that. Can you see that there's a requirement for an as-built drawing, a line drawing of the as-built system showing the major components? Do you see that?
Yes.
That's how it's described. And I'm assuming that this version here is a mock-up, is it? It's an example of how you might.
Yes.
And on pages 7 to 10, if we just scroll through those 4 pages, we can see, just go back to 7, yes, system and components photo collection sheet. To ensure photographs of the relevant and important components are taken, the following sheet is to be used to collect and log images of the system and its components. Who was responsible for completing that task there?
That will be the project engineer responsible for the delivery of the test.
Right. Would that be the officer in charge?
Yes, it's the person responsible for the test.
And similarly, in relation to the line drawing we saw at page 6, who would be the person responsible for completing that task? Would that also be the project engineer?
It should be, yes.
Yeah. So the project engineer or officer in charge, whoever was running the test, was responsible for filling in this run of documents. Is that right?
Yes, it is, but it could also be others involved who the project manager for the test delegated or asked to do it as well. It wasn't exclusively the project engineer. Others did get involved.
And if others got involved, was the system at the BRE such that the project officer, engineer or officer in charge would make sure that whoever did it, if it wasn't them, had done it right and filled in correctly?
Yes.
Yes. Now, if we go back to page 10, we can see that there's a second part of this document. Page 10, please. And that is halfway down the page. Standard procedures for undertaking BS 8414 parts 1 and 2 tests. And it says the BS 8414 tests are undertaken on walls 1 to 4 in the BRE burn hall. The following working procedures will assist while undertaking the test. Procedures set out here are to be followed while undertaking the test and do not refer to pre-test setup, which is described in the document Standard Procedures for Undertaking BS 8414 Parts 1 and 2 Pre-Test Setup, which we've already seen. Tasks can be undertaken by any member of the test staff, but must be confirmed by the nominated officer. Then you have TO, test officer, OIC, officer in charge, and SO, safety officer. Was this document created around the time of your email? We've seen May 2013.
I'm not 100% sure. I don't know the actual date of that document.
Do you?
It may have been. It may have been in response to that.
Do you remember whether there was this document had a predecessor?
I believe there was a predecessor, but I'm not that familiar.
Right. Or is it the case that this document simply formalised what had already become common practice within the BRE?
I believe it's the latter, but I haven't got. I haven't got any information to say, or what paperwork was in place at that time. I believe there was a document prior to that.
And was this document created as a result of a project to improve BRE's approach to reporting? As I think you've said at paragraph 53 of your statement.
Yes, I believe that's the case.
So that's the product of it. Now let's look at one or two of the other standard forms bearing on test procedure, which were also attached to the 15th of May email. Now, if we can go back to the email, we'll see the attachment. This is BRE 405773, please, at page 2, to show you the email. And I think page 3, but I think we could probably use page 2. You can see that one of the attachments there is in the second line, cladding test data file and report preparation sheet. You see that?
Yeah.
It's right, isn't it, that that document has a checklist which includes requirements such as receive client's system specifications, undertaking component check and obtain samples, construction survey, photographs, and final construction photographs taken, doesn't it?
I'm not familiar with that document, but if that's
right.
But
well, maybe we can show you that. Do you remember whether, before we do, whether that was a document created in or around the 15th of May email as part of the same project?
I believe it was.
Right. And what would be involved in checking the components of the test rig?
Measurement of components, identification from labels. Not sure there's much else I can add, really.
Right. And you'd expect those tasks to be carried out fully, accurately and completely, would you?
Yes.
And would you expect the officer in charge, the project engineer, to compare the drawings received from the client for the rig to be built with the as-built test rig?
Yes, if you're including items that go into the report, then they should be checked.
And would you expect that person to record clearly and completely the details of each component of the test rig as built?
Yes.
And what would the purpose of taking samples be?
Well, for standard testing, if you're doing a test contract with a test sponsor, I think you're unlikely to take test samples. You'll probably need to take test samples if the certification board, the LPCB, were involved in the project, because
right.
There was additional requirements.
Right. We'll come back to question of process later in your evidence. Can I then turn to the chronological story and start with Kingspan's BR135 classification? And I'd like to ask you first about the BRE's relationship with Kingspan and some of the tests to BS 8414, sponsored by Kingspan and carried out at the BRE. Just to confirm for me that you were not involved with Kingspan's first official BS 8414 test to part 1 of that standard on a system comprising K15, carried out on the 31st of May 2005.
No, it wasn't.
Did you have any involvement with the creation of the test report for that test later in that year, 2005?
No.
Before you assumed your joint management role with Sarah Colwell in 2006, had you ever had any dealings with Kingspan?
Yes, it's very likely that I conducted 1181 tests at the site in Holywell on sandwich panels.
And who would have been, you can remember it, who were your contacts at Kingspan for that purpose at that time?
A gentleman by the name of Jay Humphreys and Martin Gilbride.
And did they have anything to do with BS 8414 testing? You know?
At that time?
At that time?
No.
Later?
There was 8414 tests conducted for Kingspan Limited, which is the panels division. And I believe all those have been submitted as evidence.
Now let's see how we go with this, given your lack of involvement personally. But let me see if I can understand some of the more systemic questions. Can we go to KIN 50134, please? This is the BRE report, which is the classification report, dated 28th of September 2015 for Kingspan K15, based on the BS 8414 test done in 2005. Can you see that?
Yes.
You, I think, had quite a lot of involvement in the production of that report, didn't you?
That's correct.
Just pausing there, is a 10-year delay between the date of the test and the date of the classification a normal occurrence at the BRE, in your experience?
No.
If we look at page 2, we can see that the report was prepared by Vida Gaubsite. Now, I'm sure I mispronounced her name, and I don't want to do that. How do you pronounce her surname?
It's difficult. Vida Gaubsite. I'd like you. It's a difficult one for me to get the time.
Right. Okay. Well, we'll call her Vida. And you signed it as well on the 28th of September.
That's correct.
I'll come back to the report in detail in a moment. But in paragraph 41 of your statement at page 10, let's just look at that. You tell us in general in answer to the question, what checks are carried out by the BRE before a BR135 report is approved? You set out there a list of 5 checks that would be carried out. And you set them out there and I won't read them out to you. Could you explain in practical terms how the relevant BRE employee carries out those checks?
On the BR135 classification?
Yes. You say the relevant BRE will check the following.
Yes, it would be from the published test report.
From the published test report, right. Would the relevant BRE employee, whoever it was, go behind the test report as published and look at the underlying data?
Not usually. You would take the data that's presented in the test report.
In what circumstances might the relevant BRE employee go behind the data stated in the published test report?
Only if on review of the test report, there were concerns raised, but usually the BR 135 is issued against the test report. It would only be if something was spotted in the test report that you may go further.
Just help me then. Under C, looking at the check under C, that any observations in the relevant test report have been reviewed and support the mechanical performance section of the draft classification report. Does that involve looking at the test reports, the documentation or observations made in the test report itself, or do you just take those observations and lift them straight into the classification report?
No, it'd be a review of the test observations.
As stated in the published test report?
Yes.
Not in any underlying documents?
No.
I follow. And this relevant employee, who would it normally be? Would it normally be the officer in charge of the test?
It would usually be the person who's writing the test report, who does the classification as well.
Was it normal for the person writing the classification report not to have written the test report?
No, it's not normal.
So is this right, that in fact, the production of a classification report for the relevant BRE employee would be a relatively straightforward exercise because they're essentially just checking their own work?
It should be a couple. There should be the information within the BR 135 should be a mirror of what is in the test report.
When I say checking their own work, I mean, in the sense you've described, namely making sure that the classification report records what that person has already reported in the test report.
Yes.
So just bearing with me so far, it wouldn't be normal for there to be a 10-year delay between test report and classification report, and it wouldn't be normal for the employee writing the classification report not also to have written the test report. With me, that's your evidence so far, yes?
That is not normal procedure, no. You would normally have the project engineer or test engineer writing both the test report and producing the classification.
Now, when you produced the September 2015 BR 135 classification report based on the test done on Kingspan in 2005, did you discuss the test report, which is dated the 8th of December 2005, with its author?
No, I didn't.
Why is that?
Because I discussed it there was a conversation because I believe the author was Phil Clark. I can't recall who was the author, Phil Clark or Dave Hawke. Is it possible to have a look
at the original 2005
page?
It is, and we'll come to it in due course, certainly. But can we rest with a general question at the moment? Let me ask you this: did you have a conversation with Phil Clark, who was certainly primary author of that report, on the 8th of December 2005? About well, and my question is, why is that? Why didn't you have a discussion with him about it, given that you weren't the author of the test report?
Because I didn't think it was something that was necessary. We've been asked to produce a classification report on a report issued by BRE.
Given that this was unusual, and given the norm that the person writing the test report would do the classification report, why not simply have a conversation with him about a report that was produced 10 years before to make sure you understood what it was you were reviewing?
Because, as I said, I didn't believe it was necessary at the time. The BRE had issued a test report. The report was signed off. The report was approved. Consultation went on within the department as to whether we should do it. I didn't feel it was necessary to discuss with Phil Clark.
Right. When you produced this classification report, did you review any hard copy or electronic files of data underlying that test report?
The data that was reviewed was that presented in the test report.
So, help me. When you produced the classification report, you only had in front of you the 2005 test report.
Yes.
You're telling us you didn't have any of the hard copy or electronic document underlying a 2005 test report?
No.
Right. Well, we'll come back to that in a moment. Can I just ask you to look at Vida's witness statement, BRE 405627 at page 11, please. She says in her statement at paragraph 47, Stephen Howard of BRE reviewed the technical file and my draft of the classification report and subsequently authorised the final draft of that report. She says that you reviewed the technical file. Is she right?
I don't believe I reviewed the actual test file. I think the technical file that's been referred to was the technical file produced for the classification report, because you open a technical file for each project, or a file for each project. If that file was available, then I don't recall going back to that and reviewing.
What was on the technical file?
The technical file would have been, well, I would imagine on the technical file was the paperwork, quotation, correspondence associated with the production of the classification report.
Any technical data?
The technical data was based on, would only be the test report, I believe. I can't recall reviewing that report, reviewing the file.
So it's not a technical file at all, really. It's a correspondence file comprising the original test report and correspondence with the client about the production of the classification report.
That's correct. That is my understanding.
You see, the reason I'm asking you is that Mr. Hoare, in his witness statement, David Hoare, and I don't think we need to go to it, but it's at BRE 405622 at page 11, paragraph 42, says that his understanding is that the original test file for the 2005 Kingspan K15 test is no longer available. Is that right?
I don't believe we located the file.
Right.
I don't believe that we located the actual physical test file that was called for the storage of notes, data, printed off photographs and things like that.
I see. Did you look for the original test file when setting about your task of preparing the classification report?
Yes, I believe we looked.
And I'm assuming from what Mr. Hall says, your agreement with it was that you couldn't find it. Is that right?
I don't think it was ever located. If it was located, it would have been provided to the public inquiry. So there is a mechanism there to confirm whether we ever located it, but it's not clear to me whether we did or not.
Given that the practice was to use the test report only as the basis for the classification report, what was the purpose of trying to find the test file?
So that you could collate all the paperwork regarding that project in one place again, so that it was just good practice, so that we recovered the file, placed it back in the system along with the classification file.
But if the classification report was going to be based solely on the data appearing on the face of the published test report, what was the point of going back to the original test file comprising the data underlying the test report?
Only from a filing and procedural basis that you've located a file, but there was no real necessity for us to access the original project file.
Mr. Chairman, is that a convenient moment?
Well, does it suit you, Mr. Millett? Presumably it does.
I was sort of stranded between the beginning of one topic.
All right. Well, we'll take the opportunity since you stopped. Mr. Hyde, as I said, we're going to have a break during the afternoon. We'll take that break now. We'll start again, please, at 3:30. And let me remind you, please not to talk to anyone about your evidence or anything relating to it over the break. All right?
Yes, I understand.
Thank you very much. See you at 3:30 then. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. We're going to continue hearing from Mr. Howard. Mr. Howard, are you there? Can you see me and hear me all right?
See and hear you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And you ready to carry on?
I am, but I'm not full screen at present for some reason.
Ah, well, now, if you... I hesitate to give anyone technical advice, but in the top right-hand corner of the reduced screen that I've got, there's a button called View. Do you have that?
Yes.
You click on that, you should get various options, one of which is full screen.
Thank you very much.
Oh, good. I managed to work the oracle. There we are. Right. Well, if you're ready to carry on, I'll invite Mr. Millett to ask some more questions. Yes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Howard, can I ask you please to go to page 10 of your witness statement and look at paragraph 40 with me, please. And you say in that paragraph there, I should actually show you the question at the foot of page 9 first, if you can just be shown that, because it's important you see the question you're answering. It's question 2K. What information / documents are normally provided to the author of a BR135 report following a BS8414 test report on the same system? And if you turn the page to paragraph 40, you see that you say there, the classification report author will also have access to any photographs and or videos which may not have been included in the test report, as well as access to the test file generally. How does that square with what you were telling us earlier on about the classification report being based solely on what appeared on the face of the test report?
Well, if you are BRE staff and you are working within the department that was dealing with cladding or fire, then you would have access to the records and the storage. So it's fact that you would have access, but the BR135 is generated on the basis of the test report.
Right. Let's just get back then to my question. When a classification report author sat down to prepare the classification report, would they use the underlying test data that you referred to here, such as photographs or videos or the test file itself, or would they solely work from what appeared on the face of the test report?
They would solely work on what was in the test report.
So what was the purpose of the classification report author having access to the photographs or videos or the test file generally?
I think it was just a statement that if necessary and they had specific questions or they identified something in the test report that they are unclear of, then they have access to further information. Usually you would just, you would base the classification report on the test report.
I follow. But does paragraph 40 mean that when you came to be the classification report author in respect of the 2005 test report, you didn't have access to the photographs or videos not included in the test report or the test file?
No, we based the classification report on the test report.
So that put you as the author of the classification report in an unusual position, yeah?
Yes.
Can we go to paragraph 50 of the same statement, please? See a little bit lower down, paragraph 50, which is on page 12. You say there, the BRE is sometimes asked to test building-specific systems where there can be a conflict between the test standards and what's needed for the sample. In each such cases, any deviations will be noted in the relevant test report and a view will be taken as to whether the system can be satisfactorily classified to BR135. Would that be an instance where, as a classification report author, you would need to look at the underlying test data?
No, because it should be in the test report. Deviations should be recorded in the test report.
Now, can we look at Mr. Clark's witness statement, please? This is a BRE 405768. And I'd like to go to paragraph 50, please. in that report, which you see at the bottom of page 11. And you can see that he says there, in answer to the question, what documents are provided to the BRE employees tasked with preparing, writing or approving a BS 8414 test report? And he says a test file would be prepared as part of the process for testing, which included any relevant information pertaining to the system installed and which had been tested. This would include items such as drawings of the system provided by the client, any delivery notes of materials received by BRE, notes taken by the test officer detailing the construction of the test sample, photographic evidence of the construction, and any construction materials used. It would also include a set of photographs taken before, during, and after the test, a set of handwritten or typed observations, set of drawings showing the position of the thermocouples, and the channel number assigned to each instrument. Do you agree with that list you set out there?
Yes.
And it appears we could see from other test files that an assortment of other documents were also usually included in the test file, such as email correspondence.
Yeah, things like financial information potentially would be included in the test file, quotations, invoices.
The correspondence.
Some correspondence, yeah.
Some correspondence. Now, if we can go to page 58 of your witness statement, please. Let's go back to that. Page 58. I want to look at paragraph 252. And the question you're being asked here, question 8A, what documents and information were made available to you? This is in the context of the September 2015 classification report you authored. You say, I had a copy of the original test report, i.e. test report 220876, the fire test data and notes from the test itself. See that? And you cite,
Yes.
You cite the exhibit numbers of your exhibit. It's right, I think, and we can check it if you like, but pages 634 to 649 is just another copy of the original test report, isn't it?
Well, would it be possible to see that? Because I might...
Yes, of course, absolutely. BRE 405773, please. And I'll just show you your exhibit. I just wondered whether you would recognize the numbers. If you go to page 618, you can see where the start of the test report is.
Yeah, that's it.
Yes. And if you go to page 634, and there's another one. Yes. It's just another copy of the test report. Yes.
Yeah.
Seems to have gone in twice. 653. That's a further copy of the drawing of the test rig already included in the test report, isn't it?
Yeah.
654 to 77. It's some 22, 23 pages. Is we can see 654 and following contemporaneous email correspondence relating to the request for and preparation of the classification report in 2015, isn't it?
Yeah.
Scroll through the pages if you like, but we've been...
No, if that's what...
Yes. Yes, so in fact, is it right that the only contemporaneous documents from the time of the BS 8414 test that you had available to you when you prepared the classification report in September 2015 are the 3 pages of notes that we can see on page 650. You can go to that. You see them there.
Yes, I think that information was located, but I cannot actually recall where we found it.
Okay. And just to be clear, that's 650. And if we could just look at pages 651 and 652 for completeness, I said it was 3 pages. Confirm with me that those are the notes on the file you reviewed. Yes?
Yes, so if I've submitted those in evidence, but as I said, the review for the BR 135 would have been based on the test report.
Now, based on the exhibit I've shown you, we've seen 2 versions of the test 2 copies of the test report, we've seen the drawing, we've seen the 2015 correspondence and the 3 pages of the contemporaneous documents. Do you agree that you didn't have a complete test file for the 2005 test to work from in accordance with the usual things that you might have normally?
Yes, that's correct.
You didn't have access to the delivery notes or the full set of photographs showing the construction and the components?
No.
You wouldn't have been able to double check the components of the test rig?
No, the BR135 is based on a signed off test report.
You didn't have the test video? You didn't have the test videos?
I don't believe so, no. But the usual practice is to issue the BR135 against the test report.
And you didn't have access to any of the email correspondence from the time of the 2005 test?
No.
Now, before we look at the report itself, the classification report itself, can I look with you at some of the correspondence leading up to its production? Can we go to paragraph 53 of your witness statement, please? Page 53 of your witness statement. Sorry, I said paragraph, I meant page. And look at paragraph 234, please. And at 234, you're answering the question from the inquiry, question 8, in your recollections as to the preparation of the classification report, dated 28 September 2015, a copy of which is attached to your reference. That report was prepared by VIDA and approved by you for Kingspan Insulation Limited. If we look at paragraph 234, your answer, you say, as far as I'm aware, the first contact I had regarding what would become classification report P1018121,000 was when I received an email from Conor McIntosh of BRE on 19th of August 2015, see pages 519 to 523. Mr. McIntosh had forwarded an email from Adam Heath of Kingspan on the same date, which started as follows, and you set it out. And he says, on a slightly related topic, it has come up in discussions recently that we never commissioned a classification report for our BS8414 test attached for reference. This test was originally completed in 2005. I have 3 questions really. Can a classification report be issued for this test? How much will it cost? What is the timescale for delivery in the event this is possible? Any guidance you can offer here would be much appreciated. Now that is at BRE 405773, page 520. Again, it's your exhibit. But you cite from it, so we can stick with your witness statement. In his covering email to me, Mr. McIntosh wrote, any thoughts on this one below? Test completed in 05, and they're wanting a classification report for it. And then you replied on the 21st of August as follows, we would need to go through and check it that it is okay. In principle, though, I can't see why we wouldn't classify. What do you mean when you say that you would need to go through and check it's okay? Okay for what?
Well, you would need to go through and review the test report against test standard, make sure the test standards that was used was the correct version to be classified by BR135.
The email that Mr. McIntosh forwards to you, that you recited, was also forwarded to somebody called Damien Ward. Who was he?
Damien worked within the LPCB of the Passive Fire Department.
Right. Why was he involved in this?
It was just a case of obtaining an opinion from someone else that on this matter, really. It was just a question of a colleague to see if they had any raised any concerns.
Who made the decision that the report was okay, as you put it?
Me, by signing off the classification report.
What told you that the report was okay?
Well,
you measuring the okayness against?
Because the report was issued against a version of BR135 that was current and could be classified to, the report was issued against a version of BS8414 that could be classified to BR135.
At that stage, did you check with anyone more senior than you as to whether it would be appropriate to issue a classification report based on this test report?
No,
Why's that?
because it's something that the test lab does a lot of throughout the year, not on test reports that old, I admit, but issuing of classification reports for tests within the responsibility of the department.
Given the special circumstances here, namely the decade of delay between the test and the classification, and the absence of the original test file with the sorts of documents to which the classification report author would normally have access, given those two things, why didn't you just check with somebody more senior than you as to whether it would be appropriate to issue a classification report based on this test report?
Because my view was that the classification report is just a statement of pass-fail. The classification report refers to a test report that was issued to BS 8414 Part 1, and the classification report is no more than a statement of pass-fail against that standard, to BR 135.
Let's go to page 525, please, your exhibit. That's BRE 405773. If we look down the page, you can see that here is an email from Adam Heath, halfway down the page, on the 25th of August 2015, timed at 12:38, to you, copy to Adrian Pargeter and Conor McIntosh. It's titled BS 8414 Part 2 with 140mm K15 behind terracotta. And that's the subject of the first two paragraphs of this email. But I'm interested in the third paragraph, which says this: the business is also interested in getting a classification report for our BS 8414 test from 2005. Is this possible? What are the time and cost implications? And you respond, as you can see from the email just above that, if that can be scrolled down so you can see it. A little bit later that day, to Adam Heath at 15:03, Adam, please find attached the report for the terracotta test. And then in the last paragraph or sentence of that email, you say, I think we have the other classification report in hand. I will check and let you know. Regards, Stephen Howard. What do you mean by in hand?
I expect to mean that it was being produced. We made a decision we were going to do it, and someone was drafting the BR 135 report.
At that stage, had somebody gone through and checked that it was, as you put it, okay for the report to be issued, as per the earlier email we saw?
Well, I wouldn't recall, but it does say that I need to check, and we'll come back to him the following week.
Right. When you say, I think we have the other classification report in hand, what had already happened in relation to the production of that classification report that you were telling him?
I think it was a discussion along the lines of we were reviewing the test report and with a view, if we could, to produce a classification report.
Have you actually?
It says I think it's in hand. I hadn't actually checked at that point as to where we got to.
Do you know? Have you actually started work on the production of a classification report?
I can't, given the dates, I can't say categorically, but we probably reviewed the test report and had a look to see if there was anything that would prevent issuing of a BR 135. But you would go through and check the report before issue of the classification.
Indeed. And I just wanted to work out from you what work had already been done when you sent this email, Mr. Heath.
Well, we've located the test report. It's probably been reviewed. It's been discussed. I've sought advice or opinions from other people as to whether we should do it. And I think that reflects the stage that we were at. We should be able to tell, because the agreement to do it actually would be a quotation. So if it's critical that the timelines, there should be a quotation, which is at the point where we have basically committed to do it.
Now, further up the email chain, do that, please go up 524. At the top of that page, we can see an email from you to Vida, copy to Damien Ward, on the 3rd of September 2015, in which you forward to Vida the email chain and the test report itself. And you say, the test report is here, and you identify it on your system. Can you go through and correct? But you need to check that what they are saying is correct. Photos, etc., are in the same place. You need to write the classification report. An example is attached. And then you go down and ask for a quotation, go down a little bit further. You identify the report. It seems I don't know whether that's a different report, but it looks like it's got a different number. Can you just tell us what's the difference between the report and the test report?
Sorry, the first one was I believe was an ongoing project. So there's two sets of correspondence there.
Oh, I follow. I'm sorry. So the first one is not the report, then the second one is?
The second one then refers to, the 300 number, 303930, is a test report, I believe. I don't think it's a classification report for a different project, and the 220876 was the 2005. So there's two subject matters on that email.
So I see. So the first part of the email is about one classification report. The second, can you quote for a second classification report? And that's this report, the 2005 report.
Yeah.
You say need to check on issue levels of BR 135. What do you mean by that sentence?
Well, just basically to check which issue, the issue level of the document and BR 135. I think what I meant was have a read of BR 135 and make sure that the issue levels of the 135 and the standard actually match. I can't be 100% sure.
Did you ask Vida to carry out any particular checks, given that the BSA 414 test had been carried out some 10 years previous?
Not specifically, because test reports, as I said, are statements of fact. The checks that would be made were whether the issue level of BR 135 that was current would allow classification to the standard that was used at the time for the test.
When you say the issue level, do you mean the most recent data publication?
Yeah, but with technical documents, they usually say when they're revised or up-issued, it's usually issue 1, issue 2, issue 3. So we'd work to the latest version.
Right, I see what you mean. So BR 135 in 2015 would have been the 3rd edition. Would you call that the 3rd issue?
Sorry, yes, 3rd edition.
Right, I see. And did Vida carry out any particular checks? Do you know?
I don't know. I haven't, without going through the file, or I wouldn't know. And
did you ask yourself why it was that Kingspan was asking for this classification report 10 years on after the test?
I did, and I think the response was we never actually asked for one at the time. So,
yes. You wondered yourself what lay behind Kingspan's request. Why did they suddenly want one now, given that they hadn't asked for one at the time, nor asked for one at all during the intervening decade?
I don't know the actual reasoning as to why they needed a BR 135 now. to me, that wasn't, it's technically or procedurally whether we can issue a classification document, the reasons why I didn't pursue.
Did you ask yourself how it was that Kingspan had managed only with a test report, but no classification report for K15 in that 10-year intervening period?
Did I ask myself? Well, I think the answer to that is I was aware that the test report was being used in support of cladding systems being installed on buildings, but the level of detail I had of that was minimal because you have very little visibility as a test lab as to what manufacturers are actually doing with the test data that they have, or test reports that they have.
Did Kingspan ever give you a reason why they wanted the classification report now and had never asked for it in the intervening 10 years?
No.
No. Can we go to BRE 405071, please? This is an email. I think we need to go to the bottom of page 1 for it, from Adam Heath to Vida on the 8th of September 2015 at 15:23, relating to this related to this classification report, as well as the terracotta test, which I think was the subject matter of the other report that you had asked her to write. And he says, "Dear Vida, thanks for the prompt request. On a slightly related topic, it has come up in discussions recently that we never commissioned the classification report for our BS 8414 test attached for reference. This test was originally completed in 2005. I have 3 questions really, and we saw this before. And then if you go up the page to the next email up, you can see that Vida forwards that email on to Tony Baker on the same day. Dear Tony, please be so kind to advise regarding our client request below." And then above that, we can see that Tony Baker responds to Vida on the 9th of September. And he says, "This is not a straightforward one. In theory, we could issue a classification document. However, I can understand why one was not issued for this test, as it seems like an indicative type test. BS 8414 and BR 135 is a system test and classification system, and from what I can see from this report, there's no external weather protection system included, for example, render system or grain screen cladding. Whilst they have a cement board overcladding, I doubt this would be considered a complete system. Data such as this has been misrepresented in the market in the past. I suggest this question should be passed by Steve Howard and or Debbie Smith before a response is sent." So this is what Vida is doing at that date. The first question is, were you asked the question, should we issue a classification report, as suggested by Tony Baker?
Yes.
And did you discuss with Tony Baker the fact that it appeared from the test that there was no external weather protection system, but instead a cement board overcladding?
I don't recall talking to him, no.
Did you discuss with him the fact that this looked like an indicative type test?
Well, no, I didn't.
Did you discuss with him the observation made by Tony Baker to Vida here that data such as this have been misrepresented in the market in the past?
No, I didn't discuss those elements specifically with him against this class in regard to that classification.
From your own knowledge at the time, was it the case that data such as this have been misrepresented in the market in the past?
I wasn't aware of misrepresentation of that report, but as I said, we had very little visibility of what was being accepted on what basis for compliance with or meeting the recommendations of ADB.
Now, clearly Tony Baker has got the concerns he's expressed in this email. Do you know whether he had a conversation with Debbie Smith about these matters?
I don't know that.
Do you agree that the concerns expressed by Tony Baker in his email to Vida on the 9th of September 2015 were serious matters which deserved consideration by the BRE?
Well, I don't actually agree with the statement that it was an indicative test report.
Why don't you agree with that statement?
Because if you issue an indicative test report, procedures within BRE is to mark the test reports as indicative or not to issue an indicative report at all. We were looking at a test report that was, in my consideration, compliant with what was going on at the time.
Now, if you go to page 557 in this exhibit row, we can see that this is an email from Vida to you on the 14th of September 2015, right? Which says, and the subject, forward, BS 84141, Kingspan Phenolic Insulation System Classification Report. And there's an attachment, there's a draft. Stephen, please check the draft of Kingspan Phenolic System Classification Report. Thanks, regards, Vida. See that?
Yeah.
Then if you look below that, what she's forwarding to you is an email also to you, or maybe in fact it's just an email, part of the email chain with this below it. She says, same day, good morning, Stephen. Please can you check the quotation for Kingspan insulation, but also please see below Tony notes. And then she's highlighted those. Hi Vida, this is not a straightforward one, etc., etc. And you can see the whole of the block text, which I read to you originally from 9th of September email from Tony Baker to Vida. She's passing this on to you, Mr. Howard.
Yeah.
You would have seen the text of this. This question, although may not necessarily posed directly by Tony Baker to you, was certainly passed on to you by Vida, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yes. Did you have a discussion with either Vida or Debbie Smith or Tony Baker about the concerns raised by Tony Baker in his email to Vida we've seen?
I believe I discussed it with Vida.
Right. And can you tell us, please, the nature of those discussions?
I think I would have discussed through concerns raised that she's raised with me and the reasoning why I thought it was still appropriate to issue a classification.
Right. Well, let's see if we can get a little bit more into the detail. You received this email from Vida on the 14th of September, and then but you get it twice because we can see you sent it at 8:42, and then again later that morning when she sends the report, because it's part of the same email stream. At what point did you have the discussion with Vida on the matters, the subject of Tony Baker's email?
I can't recall an exact time. But if we can go up, are we talking about the same report or is that a different classification report?
Talking about the classification report based on the 2005 test?
I would have discussed it with her. I can't remember an exact time, but I was aware of this as an issue. I'd seen the emails. My view is we're issuing a classification report against a BRE test report that isn't an indicative or marked as one against a tested system.
So what did you tell Vida? Did you tell her, yes, it's straightforward, we can issue this because it's not an indicative type test?
Yes, I think that was my view, but whether I communicated that with her directly, I can't recall.
What led you to think that this was not an indicative type test?
Because the test, when you issue indicative, the usual BRE practice is not to issue test reports for indicative tests. They just issue a letter. If you do an ad hoc or indicative type test, it's made very clear in multiple places in the test report that it's an indicative test.
Now, you can see the reasons in this email that Mr. Baker gives, and which Vida is passing on to you that morning. And he says, and you will have seen, that 8414 and BR135 is a system test. And from what I can see from this report, there's no external weather protection system included, for example, render system or rain screen cladding. Did you agree with Tony Baker on that point?
Yes, I think, yes, it wasn't a render system or rain screen cladding. It was a single board system.
Yes. And he says it's a cement board over cladding, and then goes on to say, I doubt this would be considered a complete system. Did you agree with Tony Baker on that?
Yes, to some extent, yes.
And in that sense, if that's what Mr. Baker meant by it seems like an indicative type test, you were agreeing with his observation, weren't you?
Well, no, I don't believe that it was an indicative test. As I said, BRE had issued a full test report against a tested system. We don't comment on beyond what it requires in the standard about system configuration. And in fact, you shouldn't. So if we'd issued a full test report, we don't comment on sample suitability for placing on the market. We're not involved in the design. It's a classification report issued against a test report, which was in accordance with BS 8414.
Indeed, Mr. Howard. And in a sense, that's the point. You're right that the test report was not marked indicative, but nonetheless, Mr. Baker is telling Vida and you that it looked in substance to be indicative because the cement board over cladding would mean that it couldn't be considered a complete system. And you agreed with that. So in that sense, you were agreeing that in substance, the test was only indicative.
No.
Then I don't understand your answer. Why was it not an indicative only test if in fact the cement board over cladding that was being used was not representative of cladding systems out there in real life?
Because what you are doing is testing a system to a standard. And we don't comment on the system designs or anything like that, providing the sample, and that can be any configuration, meets the requirements of BS 8414, i.e. in terms of size, configuration and things of that nature. In my view, that's classifiable to BR 135. We don't comment on the relationship between sample and what's placed on the market.
Clearly, Mr. Baker had this concern because he could see what the system comprised, saw that it had only a cement board over cladding, and that told him that it looked like an indicative test. Why didn't you go back to Mr. Clark, who had written the original test report, and discuss this question with him?
because I was confident that the test report that had been issued was a full test, because I seem to recall now, with the number of people involved with their experience, my understanding was that they would not have issued an indicative test report again in that way. BRE does not issue indicative test reports that look very close to or bear any resemblance to full test reports.
Well, to be fair to Mr. Baker, he doesn't say it's an indicative report. He says indicative type test. So he's chosen his words carefully, at least I'm assuming he did. You can ask him when he comes. But he's raised this concern with you that it might be problematic to issue a classification report because of the nature of the overcladding used, namely only a cement board as opposed to a render system or rain screen cladding. And that was his concern. Why did you not share that concern?
Because what you're doing, because the system complied or could be tested to BS 8414, and that defines whether you can classify. We're not commenting on the suitability of the product. We're not involved in design. All we are saying is the system can be tested to BS 8414, part 1. It's met these temperature limitations, or its performance, so the temperature limitations didn't go above this. That is all the classification report is saying. It's not an endorsement of design.
So can we take it from this evidence, the exchange we just had, that you disagreed with Mr. Baker?
Yes, I think he said it's an indicative type report. I don't agree. It looks like a full report to me. And I don't think, and I think at that point, we possibly disagree, or he needs to speak to himself. But I think we don't get involved in system design. We don't comment on the system design.
Given that you were disagreeing with Tony Baker, why didn't you seek to have a conversation with him and discuss his concerns with him before instructing VIDA to continue with the drafting?
Because if you read in the emails, he has raised the matter with me and considered it appropriate for me to make the decision. And at the time, I just considered the matter was closed. I viewed it as quite reasonable to issue a BR135 classification against that.
I see. So you saw that he put it onto VIDA to pass this question by you. You disagreed. How did you express your disagreement to VIDA?
I can't remember whether I discussed it or whether I doubt whether it had been an email or exchange, because basically we were in very close proximity in the office.
Did you actually address your mind to these concerns? Do you actually sit down and look at the makeup of the 2005 test rig and actually ask yourself whether Mr. Baker was obviously wrong or there was something in what he was saying?
I've considered his comments.
Right. And then you just dismissed them, did you?
Well, I took the decision for the reasons I've outlined. That I thought it was within the scope of BS 8414 Part 1 to issue. I think the test sample was within the scope of the standard, and therefore it's within the scope of BR135.
You see, the basic thrust of Mr. Baker's concern was the last sentence in the main paragraph there. Data such as this has been misrepresented in the market in the past. Now, you told me earlier, in answer to my question, whether that was something you were familiar with, and you said, not really, no. I probably misquoted you, but that was the gist of it. But here you are being told that in terms by Mr. Baker. Were you not concerned to get to the bottom of what that was about?
I think we were aware, or there had been discussions of misrepresentation of test reports in the past. I didn't think really it was, if the test had been conducted in accordance with the standard, then that's not a reason, that is a reason to issue a BR135.
this is a red light, isn't it? Or blue light, telling you that data such as this test report, done on a system which was not representative of what was out there in the market, has, quotes, been misrepresented in the market in the past. Were you not concerned before instructing VIDA to complete the classification, just to understand what the nature of that problem was?
No, because it's what we are doing at that point is issuing a classification report against a test report. Now, accept those test reports and documents, as far as my view and still is, are going into a professional environment of architects, building control, and the such like. Now, if we were just fulfilling issuing a classification report, which I still believe is valid, against a test that we conducted.
Despite the risks of misuse?
We don't regulate the market. Fire test labs do not regulate the market in that way.
You don't regulate the market, no, but you do. You are responsible for classifying the result of tests, which are then used in the market. My question is, why were you prepared to classify the data in the test report, given the warning from Tony Baker that data such as this has been misrepresented in the market in the past, without getting to the bottom of what that meant?
I think I had enough knowledge of what was going on in the market and concerns raised that it wasn't, I didn't feel it was an issue that we could resolve over whether we issued a classification report or not. I still stand by that the classification report is valid.
So you were prepared to, let me just be very clear about this, Mr. Howard. You were prepared to go ahead and sanction the issue of a classification report based on test data which, such as this, had been misrepresented in the market in the past, without further investigation of what that was about?
Well, as I said, I think I was aware of misrepresentation concerns, and I don't think it directly related to this issuing of this classification. I think they are separate issues.
Right. Well, let's just look at that a little bit more. What were the misrepresentation concerns of which you were aware?
Now, what was the actual date of? I think there was an email dated somewhere around 2010, and subsequent information that claims were being made against insulation was things like limited combustibility and things of that nature, or combustible insulation was of being claimed to be limited combustibility.
Yes, and you may be referring, I don't know, to the LABC certificate for K15. Is that something you knew at the time of this email, or something that you picked up?
Probably not. No, the dates are not clear.
Right. So let's be clear. Mid-September 2015, what data, to your knowledge at that time, had been misrepresented to the market?
I think there was an email from Tony Baker, and I think it was dated around 2010, raising issues. And again, I don't remember specifics, but there had been issues over misrepresentation of data in the cladding market.
That was something you knew at the time, was it?
Not specifically, but I was aware of it at the time of issue of the 2015 classification.
Given that you were aware, at least in general terms, of some perhaps vague concerns about clients misusing test data such as this, why were you prepared, without any further investigation, to go ahead and sanction the preparation and publication of a classification report?
Because I felt it was a valid request. The cluster test report was valid, and therefore you could issue the BR135 against that document.
Despite your knowledge of the risks of its misuse? Yes?
Why would it? I don't understand the misuse aspect. The test report is a test report on data. The classification is a pass-fail statement against the test report.
We've been, I think, around this track a number of times, Mr. Howard. I'm going to suggest to you that you simply ignored Mr. Baker's warning. You didn't discuss it with him. You've had no meaningful discussion with Vida about it. And you just instructed her to get on and issue the classification report without stopping to think about what Mr. Baker was telling you.
No, I had considered the issue, and I felt it was right and within procedure to issue the BR135. No, I didn't discuss it. I cannot recall discussing it with Mr. Baker, but I did discuss it with Vida.
Now, can we go to BRE 403446, please? And I'd like to go to page 2 in that email run. This is an email at the very bottom of page 2 of the 21st of October 2013 to you, Mr. Howard.
Yep.
This is before the 2014 year that you give in your statement for when you became more involved with cladding. So do we have to bear that in mind?
Possibly, but let's proceed.
Indeed. Let's proceed. And it looks as if Mr. Roper's email to you is in the black text, and your response to him that you send on the 24th of October is at the foot of page 1, if you can just go to that. And then we'll go back to this email on page 2. At the foot of page 1, you go back to him and say, thanks for the email, please see below. PS. And then go to the top of page 2, please, email run, where we were, to see what it is that he's asking you and what you're saying. And in the second paragraph, Mr. Roper says to you, the example I can give, in fact, I probably ought to read you the first paragraph as well so that you've got the full context. He says, Stephen, without having the through-wall system details to hand, I cannot give a full explanation on the differences between the systems. However, as an example, we would be looking to test using an ACM panel with baffled joints with a cavity of 38 millimeters between the cladding and the substrate in conjunction with NHPC guidelines. If we tested this system and passed, and somebody wanted to use an open jointed ACM panel with a cavity of 50 millimeters with exactly the same brackets, insulation, wire brackets, and cement particle board, could this be covered in a report stating so? And then you give your answer. Essentially, you're saying desktop, I think. But let's look at the next paragraph. You say, the example I can give is one of our main competitors who produce both PIR and phenolic insulation. They've successfully tested a product, a BS8414, part 1, onto a masonry wall using merely a cementitious board as the outer face. Not only does this not cover the majority of the market in which they are used, but the cementitious board doesn't actually represent a drained back and ventilated grain screen system. However, we are aware that this product is used in buildings above 18 meters using a wide variety of constructions, some onto masonry, some onto steel frame with ACM panel cladding, terracotta, etc. We're surprised that they feel confident enough to allow their product to be used in buildings their fire test doesn't cover, unless they have a report to say other. Your response to that, as you can see, is if the products are LPCB approved, then we can act. if we have issued a test report on the system, then the onus is on the building owner and the building control to ensure that the system being installed is covered by a test report. I'm not sure that I have much more to add. And that's the full run of that email I want to show you. My first question is this: did you understand Mr. Roper in that correspondence to be referring to Kingspan and their 2005 test?
Yes, it infers it's Kingspan, but it doesn't specifically say that.
No, it doesn't, which is why I asked you. You understood it to mean Kingspan, even though not specific. Did you agree with Mr. Roper that cementitious board did not represent a drained back and ventilated rain screen system?
Sorry, I missed that.
Well, let me put it differently.
No, sorry, you just glitched out for a second. Sorry.
Did I? Okay, I'm sorry about that. If we can get back to the document, please. You can see in the second block of black text, he says, the cementitious, this is 4 lines down, the cementitious board doesn't actually represent a drained back and ventilated rain screen system. Now, in the blue text below it, which is your answer, you didn't disagree with him. Can we take it, therefore, that you did agree with Mr. Roper that a cementitious board did not represent a drained back and ventilated rain screen system?
No, because I would not get into that sort of discussion with a client in that way. So no, I haven't agreed with him.
No, I could see you haven't agreed with him, and I understand the reasons why you might not express yourself one way or the other. Let me ask it this way then. Did you agree in your own mind, even if not expressly, with Mr. Roper's statement that cementitious board doesn't represent a drained back and ventilated rain screen system?
No, I don't agree.
So you disagree, did you? You didn't. You thought he was wrong, did you?
I think at the time, I didn't have sufficient knowledge of all the different variations, but it's not uncommon to have cementitious boards on ventilated rain screen systems.
Mr. Roper was telling you that the cementitious board, as the rain screen, which is what it was, representative of cladding systems being installed out there in the real world. I note your answer that you didn't have sufficient knowledge, but you didn't in fact have sufficient knowledge or experience to say that he was wrong about that, did you?
Well, from my experience, I didn't agree with it because I'm aware that there were cementitious boards being used in the market.
Used in the market as an outer layer on a rain screen. Yes?
Yes, sorry.
The email at the very least tells you, doesn't it, or at least strongly suggests that Kingspan was selling K15 on the basis of a BS 8414 report build-up with a wholly unrepresentative system. That was what he was telling you, wasn't it?
Well, that was his opinion.
You didn't, I think you told us, have enough experience at that time to disagree with him.
Possibly not, no. But as I said, I'm aware that there are cement-based boards used as rain screen cladding.
Well, what type of cementitious board was used as the outer layer of a cladding system at the time of the tests, 2005? Do you know?
I can't recall without looking at the report and see what it's called in the report.
So when you received this concern from Mr. Roper that you were being told about,
yeah,
you seek to investigate it further, or did you just dismiss it out of hand? Or
I think if you look up at the email chain, there's a request to him to provide examples of claims in the market. So he was specifically requested to forward on examples as to what the issue was, i.e. what claims were being made by whom. So that email that is being shown there's more of it that starts early.
yes, I've seen that in relation to a specific comparison between one system and another, and the possibility of extrapolation. I understand that. Really, what I'm asking you is what you did with the concern expressed by Mr. Roper to you in the second paragraph about the cementitious board.
The trigger would have been because he was asked to provide examples. There's two emails that are interleaved. So if we go back up, there's a request to him to send through examples.
We've seen your response to this part of the paragraph. Just look at it again at the bottom in blue, and you say, just have that back please on the screen. You say, if we've issued a test report on a system, then the onus is on the building owner and building control to ensure that the system being installed is covered by a test report. I'm not sure that I have much more to add. Were you not concerned at the time that Kingspan seemed to be, or at least being said to be, misrepresenting the report that they obtained from the BRE in the market?
But as I said, this is the end of the email string. So essentially, there's a request earlier for him to send examples of his concerns and misrepresentation of the product in the market. It's, as you go up the email, it's in that section there. At that point, I was expecting contract information or marketing information or something to support his claim. That would have been the trigger to take this further. If you look, as I said, if you go up the email, there is a request there for information.
Well, there's one certainly. I'm not going to stand here and scrabble around in the emails, but certainly on page 3, there's a request from you to him on the 21st of October to answer the question that he's asked you in the email below that on the 18th of October, foot of page 3, top of page 4. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
Right, certainly. But this comes later in the piece. And really what I want to end with is just, I just want to put to you, really, or ask you, did you take any action at all internally within the BRE in response to Mr. Roper's concerns as expressed in that paragraph?
The trigger would have been more information supplied by Mr. Roper.
In the absence of any more information,
no.
You didn't do anything?
No, the trigger would have been more information from Mr. Roper.
So you don't say in the paragraph in blue, well, could you please give me more information about the cementitious board and your concerns about it? Do you? What information did you need?
Well, we'd need to, we would need, ultimately, you would need enough information to either go to trading standards or build or support a complaint to either trading standards or approved or the approval body that there was misrepresentation in the market, but you would need evidence of that.
How are you getting on, Mr. Millett?
I've come to the end of this line, really. I just want to ask one more question. Why didn't you ask Mr. Roper for more information on his allegation so that you could explore it?
I thought I'd asked for examples of misrepresentation in the market. Just because a system hasn't got BR135, as I said earlier, approved document B is advisory or guidance, and there's other methods for buildings or cladding systems to be accepted onto buildings. Now, without full details of that process, there's very little comment that you can make. Now, I genuinely thought that I'd made it clear that we needed detailed examples, and I acted on that basis.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Chairman, is that a convenient moment?
I think it is, yes. Well, Mr. Howard, we're going to call it a day there. We're finished for the day. I'm afraid I have to ask you to come back again on Monday of next week to continue, but I think you were expecting that.
Yeah, I'm prepared.
Yes, all right. So we'll resume then at 10 o'clock on Monday. And please remember over the weekend, it's obviously particularly important not to talk to anyone about your evidence or anything relating to it. All right?
That's understood.
Thank you very much. And we'll look forward to seeing you on Monday then.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. 10 o'clock on Monday.